I don't know you anymore. Anakin, you're breaking my heart.
Hi everyone, Mechanid here. A new wave of articles has dropped, so let's get up to the elbows in this particular chest cavity. Today, we're looking at the teasers for challenges, list building, and vehicles. But before we jump into that, I've got a little challenge for all you listeners. I want you to hold in your mind this particular quote from Games Workshop. Here goes. The Warhammer Design Studio has been pretty happy with where the game has been over the last few years, and we've seen the new edition as the opportunity to reinvestigate the core systems and make improvements, rather than make wholesale changes. Got that? Good. Let's jump right into this article. My name is Mechanid. Let's get started. Challenges. The new mechanic welded onto the assault phase. This article introduces the new challenge subphase, which is an extra step in the assault phase. On your turn, you can issue one challenge per combat as long as a character is involved. Only models with command or champion subtype, so more unit subtypes to add to the ever-growing list, can issue and accept challenges. This also likely means that the days of Sergeant stepping up to the plate is gone. Your opponent doesn't have to accept the challenge, but if they don't, they sheepishly step back from the fight and suffer a penalty to their combat for a turn. Your opponent can also issue challenges in your turn with the heroic intervention reaction, which will get more info later in an article that hasn't been released at time of writing. Once the challenge has been accepted, the two fighters separate from the main melee, and each player chooses a gambit. Each gambit adds extra modifiers to the warrior's combat stats, like extra attacks or better initiative. The fact that the active player chooses a gambit first means that the opponent has a chance to pick the perfect gambit to counter the opponent's choice. Once each player has a gambit, you make a focus roll. This roll takes the place of using the old initiative system and is how you choose which champion fights first and gets the extra attack. To make the focus roll, both players roll a dice, add their initiative and any modifiers from their gambit, war gear, special rules, etc. If you win, you get to strike first and you gain an extra attack. After the focus roll, the player who won gets to fight first and then the opposing player, and so on until there is a winner. At this point, you should start to see my problem with the system. So many more steps and caveats are in place. Whereas in 2.0, the system for challenges was far more simple and easy to understand. It was the same system that you used for regular melee combat, meaning that if you learned that system, you learned it for both challenges and regular melee combat. Now, you need to learn a second, more complicated system to be able to fight in a challenge. After all that, we also learned some weapon stats, like charnable sabers, which are now useful, which is nice, as well as teasers for the Black Sword and the White Tiger Dao. My biggest issue with these new challenges, my biggest issue with this new challenge mechanic, that this is likely going to grind the game to a halt. Challenge has already soaked up a lot of time. Now with the selecting of gambits in this face-off step and the focus step and having its own challenge subphase, it will likely only drag this out further. And while I'm sure veteran players will be able to speed through this, I can't see this system being anything other than unfriendly to new players or to the intermediate or casual players. Just the fact that there are so many steps involved in just the challenge, not the combat, just the challenge alone, implies to me that this is going to be a very time-consuming mechanic to resolve. Just the fact alone that players are limited to one challenge per combat tells me that the designers knew that this was a time-consuming mechanic and as such needed to mitigate the time sink as much as possible. Imagine having 2 or 3 of these to resolve across the entire battle, both in your phase and then in your opponent's combat phase. It's going to turn into such a slog. I would be very surprised if Sergeants can still issue and accept challenges in 3.0, because otherwise the game will be consumed with gambits and challenge minigames. Finally, with each legion getting its own gambit, and with everything GW makes, I think there'll be a clear-cut best pick for which gambit to pick in most scenarios, and challenges will become solved with an objectively best loadout and gambit selection. Not to say that 2.0 was free of this. We all know of the Thunderhammer spam, but at least in 2.0 you had ways around it, like getting in a cheeky Paragon Blade instant death hit, or drowning the hammer wielder in hits before they had a chance to strike, or even just using something like Biomancy to increase your toughness and get out of that instant death threshold. It remains to be seen right now, but the challenge mechanics to me does not offer much gameplay depth. List building. Oh boy, this is a big one. To all the people praising GW for keeping the Force organization chart, this is just not it. GW bold-faced lied to us when they said that the Crusade Force org was still in the game. They knew that what we were thinking about was the old system, so they said that to us to reassure us and then delivered us this. They lied to us, plain and simple. I would have much preferred if they just told us that they were revamping the system from the get-go and just introduced it to us, rather than trying to beat around the bush and deceive us with smoke and mirrors. It already primes me to be against this new system, and that's before we even see any of the good things that it can do. So straight away, it's a really bad first impression. now that that coffin nail is hammered in, this is the new force organization chart. A flow chart. Okay, I'm listening. This is how it works, step by step. You start with a primary Crusade detachment, which is these slots and 2 prime slots, which we'll get onto later. You can fill these slots however you like with the units that fulfill the new revamped unit types. Instead of a traditional HQ, elites, troops, fast attack, heavy support, and so on, we now have several new types. The ones confirmed are High Command, Command, Troops, and Transport. From there, for every command slot you fill, you can also take an auxiliary detachment. Note that if you fill a command slot with a regular non-console Centurion, you get 2 auxiliary detachments, which is a much needed buff to regular Centurions who otherwise would never see play over their console cousins. This means that you can have a potential of 6 auxiliary detachments at base if you just take Centurions. Now, the auxiliary detachments lets you bring more specialist units. Armored Fist is for heavy transport and looks like you're trying to build a mechanized force. Tactical support lets you bring more troops and support slots for heavy and special weapons, medics and the like. Armored support for tanks. Heavy support for dreadnoughts, combat pioneer for recon squads and bikes, shock assault for terminators, first strike for previously fast attack units like jet bikes and speeders. And there's a couple of things to note looking at all of this. Bikes and jet bikes are now in separate slots. Dreadnoughts get their own special detachment, and also take note of the number of slots that you get. If each of these detachments comes with a console or Centurion tax, then bear in mind how many slots you're getting for each character you have to take to unlock that detachment. Next, taking a unit in the High Command slot unlocks a special set of Apex detachments. Combat Retinue, which is Command Squad and looks like you can now take 3 Command Squads, so that's pretty wild. Officer Cadre, which unlocks more command slots, so that's a way to get even more detachments into your army. Army Vanguard, which unlocks your elites and Legion-specific specialists. There's also Warlord detachments, which lets you bring a Primarch and can only be run in games of 3,000 points or more, which is a little weird as it means that Primarchs can't be run in smaller games like the 2,500 points and the like. I get that this is done for balance, but I expect to see this rule get house ruled away very quickly as players want to play with their Legion dads. And that's how you fill out your list. You take command slots to get access to auxiliary detachments, you take high command slots to get access to apex detachments, and you place units into the slots unlocked by your choices above. Finally, prime slots are these special ringed slots. These grant extra bonuses if you fill them. One example is the logistical benefit, where you may add one of a number of units to that detachment without having to spring for a whole auxiliary detachment. Okay, cool. 2 things though. First, I wonder what other benefits prime slots can add and if they'll outweigh the advantage of, for example, getting to take a dreadnought in this detachment, and not needing to pay the extra cost for another Centurion. Second, is there any reason to not take a prime slot? Seriously though, if it's all upsides and no downsides, then in my eyes, this will become the new compulsory slot to fill. You won't be looking for a HQ and 2 troops, you'll be looking to fill out these prime slots, not because you necessarily have to, because you don't want to miss out on all those sweet prime benefits. In addition, the article hints that prime slots will give the squad in the prime slot special buffs to fighting prowess or to advanced characteristics, for example. This to me is another thing that's going to create memory issues. You as a player will need to remember or note down which squad has the extra +1 to their cool stat, or which squad has the extra +1 to hit in melee when they get charged, on top of everything else. And for the looks of it, there's going to be a potential of 6 prime slots available. On a side note, what I want more information about is where all the units fall into. We get some ideas from the description of the auxiliary detachments and the icons they are using, but I would like it confirmed where they are all falling, as this will, in my eyes, this will determine the viability of specific detachments. If all the cool units are in one detachment, then why would there be any reason to take another? Furthermore, GW claims that this system will allow you to build more thematic armies, with forces needing to take more Centurions and consuls than before in order to get more detachments. Their aim, as they claim, is to focus on more narrative and thematic play. Okay, great. However, that's a lovely intention, but if you created a more convoluted and less user-friendly list building system, then it doesn't matter what your intentions are. I'll be curious to see how this plays out, but to me, this feels like very much like a lateral move, a side grade if you will. The old system certainly had its flaws. It was very easy to fill up the Crusade list, especially in bigger points games, and especially with the very crowded elites and heavy support slots where units were constantly jostling for attention. So this new system will likely make it easier to put more of the same units onto the table, which may have the side effect of letting players put more things like dreadnoughts or terminators onto the field, so let's watch out for that. In the old list building system, you could take a max of 4 squads of terminators in your elite slots. Now, with the new list building system, you can potentially take 3 Centurions, giving you 6 Shock Assault detachments for a total of 12 squads of Terminators. So unless I'm wrong, that's an issue that we've got waiting for us in 3.0, and we all thought 10 squads in Pride of the Legion was bad. For my thoughts, I am very split on this system. I found the old system to be very intuitive and straightforward, with this new flowchart to be anything but. I'll be interested to see how it fares when the full rulebooks come out, and the worst case scenario is that a list building program like Battle Scribe or New Recruit will be out in a month or 2, and to make this a whole lot easier to understand. I find the move away from the compulsory units to also be a silly one. I understand why, no one likes to be told that they have to do something. However, in practice, taking consoles in the command slot is going to become the new compulsory tax. While you don't have to take them, if you want to unlock the rest of your army, you're going to need to bring them along. I'll bet that you can fill out the Crusade primary detachment and not crack 1,000 points. So if you really want to actually use the rest of your army, you know, all the fun stuff like tanks and speeders and dreadnoughts and bikes and all that other stuff, you're going to need to bring some consoles along. And here's the thing, I don't have a problem with that. I think the idea of breaking your army down into detachments is cool. Having a clear chain of command and making a force feel like a real military formation, combining their firepower and specialist skills to carry the day, is a great idea. What I'm not okay with is GW claiming that the system is more freeform and open. Yes, you can take what detachments you like, but those detachments limit you to specific types of units. Just saying that this new flowchart is more freeform because you don't have to take any units doesn't mean that in practice it is more freeform. Because in practice, if you want to use your models to build the army with more than just troops and transport, you're going to need to take consoles or Centurions. It's compulsory in all but name. No wonder GW pushed all those single model Centurion kits towards the end of the last edition. Players are going to need all those new consoles for the new list building system. I see these changes to list building as baffling and convoluted, and the addition of the prime slots as being a needless power creep. While I think the new list building could make for more open and interesting lists, I find that in practice this is a side grade and not an improvement. It's different for the sake of being different. However, I'd say that a valid argument is that taking one bare-bones Centurion is less restrictive in the sense that the unit will probably cost less in points than a HQ and 2 troops units, thus freeing up more points to be spent elsewhere. However, I'd still say that to me, it's just a different flavour of restrictions, and it is neither more nor less restrictive than before. Another worry is prime slots. This to me is a bad move, as for me, this is the new compulsory units, something that GW is trying to get away from. However, instead of mandating that you take these units, if you don't fill these slots, you miss out on upgrades and potential buffs. Again, this in practice is making these prime slots compulsory. Players will be hamstringing themselves if they don't take them. It's a subtle change, but it's more of this rewarding and buffing players' units if they play a certain way, rather than just setting a mandate. I think this criticism will be largely shaped by how strong the buffs granted by prime slots are, and if those buffs directly transfer to the tabletop, especially if there's one prime slot buff that is substantially better than the others. We'll have to wait and see. Now, in the interest of fairness, I will say that I think this system has a lot of really good scalability. It would be very easy for GW to release extra auxiliary detachments in books or PDFs, like thematic formations for specific battles. I'd expect to see Legion-specific auxiliary detachments to help represent each Legion's special way of fighting, which I think would be a really good implementation of this format and gives players more reason to choose a specific Legion to play. So thumbs up there. Also, on a complete side note, I don't know why GW saw fit to change the icons for troops, elites, etc. Those designs are iconic and have been with the game for years. Players have come to know and recognize those symbols, and changing them just means more learning from the existing player base. Maybe it's just me having a skill issue, but if I was in charge, I'd want to keep as much as possible to ease the transition between 2nd and 3rd edition. Now, I get why they had to change them. GW overhauled the list building system, so the old had to be done away with, but just because I get that doesn't mean that I have to like it. For example, changing the Primarch icon from a wreathed skull into a silhouette of Rogel Dawn I find as being quite silly, as it makes the Primarch slot less applicable to all the legions. Like, this is a really small change, but it's just another reason why I see the transition from 2nd to 3rd edition as being so much change for change's sake. Maybe I'm just being salty as my Primarch got killed by a plot-armoured Imperial Fist, and yes, Alfaris is dead, it's confirmed in the Siege of Terra, stop coping about it, he's actually dead. But here's the thing, I don't want my units in my army being represented by the guy who killed my Primarch. Also, for all the Iron Warriors out there, your army list now has to bear the image of Rogel Dawn, so just another kick in the teeth, eh? Vehicles. This was the information that I was most excited for, both to see if GW would remedy the problem with vehicles being too fragile, and to see how they handle knights, as I'm a big fan of the big boys. First off, GW is keeping armor facing. Thank God. With front, side and rear facing, this means players will still be encouraged to flank the enemy tanks, attack the sides and rear, and defending players will still have to think about their tank's placement. This also bodes well for the inclusion of firing arcs still being in the game, further reinforcing the gameplay of maneuvering and positioning your armoured vehicles. Tanks also see an increase in hull points, with the example of Predator tanks going from 3 to 5. Furthermore, we see that armour penetration remains the same, with players rolling a d6 plus the range strength of the weapon, just like in older editions, with the total score matching the armour causing a glancing hit, and a score that exceeds the armour value causing a penetrating hit. However, we now see that the vehicle damage table has been done away with and this new one is in its place. We learn that vehicles have a status subphase, where they can make a roll to remove statuses. Again, slight note here, but more status subphases. Again, it seems like 3.0 is going to be absolutely rammed full of different subphases. And also, we learn that if a vehicle suffers a glancing hit and rolls on the vehicle damage table, if that vehicle gets a result that it has already rolled for, it gets a hull point instead. This means that it will be substantially harder to glance a vehicle to death, which is good, as having a bunch of bolt guns rip a tank in half has never really sat right with me. However, this is where it gets a bit sticky, as if a vehicle suffers a penetrating hit, then it loses a number of hull points equal to the damage. What this means is that extra damage weapons will be especially potent in killing vehicles, as it only takes 2 meltagun shots at range or 1 shot up close to kill a predator. We also learn some stuff about Knights and Titans. Knights have lost their side armour, now only having a front and rear, as well as getting a load more hull points, while they retain all their stats like attacks, weapons and initiative, which lets them fight like infantry. I think this is a good change, as it stops all those arguments about, oh, am I attacking the knight from the side, or am I attacking from the rear, or when do these facings end on units like knights which don't have their clear-cut corners. So just cutting them in half is a much more clean and elegant solution. Good stuff there. However, Titans now get a body part system, where players can target separate parts, which can all be damaged separately. I really like the idea of doing damage to a specific part and having extra effects, and enemy players will be rewarded by doing extra damage once a part is broken. Combining this with extra effects like doing internal damage, or wounding the Princeps, or knocking the Titan over, gives more reasons for players to be discerning where they place their shots, and those choices is what helps create a more engaging gameplay feel. It makes the unit feel more like a building come to life, with different floors set ablaze, and lets your opponent live out their Empire Strikes Back fantasies by targeting the legs of a walker to bring it down. This makes Titans feel like big boss monsters from a video game, and this to me makes them also feel quite special, and I'm here for that. There are more Titan mechanics in future books. I'll be interested to see how this plays out. Overall, I find the new changes to vehicles to be a weird one. Vehicles getting more hull points is good. It means that vehicles will have more cushion against high damage weapons, and for examples, can't be insta-killed by a las cannon across the board with a lucky explodes result on the old vehicle damage table. However, with the amount of damage being dealt by some of these weapons, especially meltaguns, I don't see the increases in hull points to be enough health. Like 2 shots from a meltagun at range to kill a predator, or 1 shot at close range, or 3 las cannon rounds if the heavy support guys stay still. Now this wouldn't be too much of an issue, but with squads of 10 being the norm, I feel that vehicles are going to be just as fragile in 3rd edition as they were in 2.0, especially if a bolt gun round to the rear could potentially result in them getting stunned or pinned or suppressed, and having all their weapons or movement shut down for a turn. I think that vehicles need substantially more hull points, if they are to stand up to multi-damage weapons. On the flip side, I like that the old damage table is gone, and vehicles can't get killed in one hit by a lucky shot. It always felt bad to me watching a tank explode just because someone got a lucky shot. Also, things like weapon destroyed results are completely gone, so that's a definite buff to vehicles. Hopefully, this rework system will be for the better, and I'm inclined to say that for the sole reason that cutting down on the amount of instances where vehicles can be instant killed is a good one. The Titan body part system is really cool. However, for me, there's a couple of issues. Now, instead of having 1 dice near the model to represent its remaining hull point count, for the Reaver Titan for example, we'll have to have at least 4, each dice tracking a different part of the body, which will no doubt create more issues like, hey, I thought that dice was for the head hull points, and no, it was actually for the legs. I really like this idea in theory, but I can see a lot of issues for it in practice. Oh, and finally, the Reaver Titan has a ballistic skill of 3 apparently. I hope this is a joke, because these are god machines. They're engines of war from the dark age of humanity, and they shoot about as well as a regular person. Like, come on, this is a letdown. In conclusion, overall, I have a lot of mixed feelings, and I'm leaning towards unhappy. With the exception of some changes to Titans and some bits to vehicles, I'm often left wondering why. I find the addition of challenge gambits unnecessary and adds bloat to an already large game. I see the new list building flowchart to be a needless change and far from the freedom GW promised, and I find that the vehicle buffs to be inadequate in the face of so many high damage weapons. Looking at all of this, and I think it's safe to assume that Games Workshop's quote about wholesale changes is a bold-faced lie, and if these changes aren't quote-unquote wholesale, then I don't know what is. Again, I am open to these changes. What I don't like is being lied to. And I think 3.0 is shaping up to be a very different game than 2.0, and if that's for the better, we'll have to wait and see. Right now, I am still not convinced of 3rd edition, and we'll need to see something interesting soon to get me invested in this new edition. As, quite frankly, the prospect of having to rebuy all the books again is an expense that I don't want. What do you guys think? Are you okay with GW lying to our faces? And what do you think of these changes? Do you think they'll be for good or for ill, or maybe just a side grade? So stay tuned for more. My name is Mechanid. Thanks for watching.